This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That is our sports betting podcast here on the FanDuel Podcast Network, getting you set for NFL Week 1, which is now just around the corner, taking a look at some advantageous win totals you can still get and the process behind win totals with Teddy Covers. He is coming up in just a little bit. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com, joined here as always by Ed Feng of thePowerRank.com. You can find Ed on Twitter at thePowerRank. Ed, we have Northwestern versus Stanford coming up on Saturday. I've got Northwestern plus 6.5, I believe is the number we agreed to.
Yep.
How are you feeling about that in the last couple of days?
I mean, I feel like we're flipping a coin.
Yeah.
You know, I'd kind of talked myself into the stupidity of giving you the points. I've kind of revised that a little bit just based on some of the research I did on Northwestern last week. You know, it's a good bet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's good for this because
Yes.
we're betting merchandise. You know, no cash or anything, but I think that it's good to have a coin flip, a line that I think is very fair.
Yeah, and I had the same, progression there, where I initially felt pretty good about it, but then the Northwestern depth chart came out and they're listing Trent Green's son as like the co-starter with Hunter Johnson, and it's like got me a little bit worried.
Wait, what?
I don't know if this is like some weird head thing that Pat Fitzgerald's trying to do. He does this a lot, so like that very well could be it, but it worked on me. So Coach Fitz, congratulations on that. I'm officially freaked out. So I guess we'll find out on Saturday if Stanford covers. Ed has to wear a Northwestern shirt on air. If Northwestern covers, Ed has to wear if Stanford covers, I have to wear a Stanford shirt. So we'll see how things play out. It's our first little head-to-head here on Covering the Spread. Pretty excited for that. If you want a preview of Week 1 college football, go to the Covering the Spread podcast feed. We talked with Edward Egros about Week 1. We chatted BYU, Utah. You're probably listening to this after that game, but you can check that out. And then Auburn, Oregon on Saturday, and Houston, Oklahoma on Sunday. I'm excited for that one personally. And if you want to make sure you get every podcast as they're posted, and we'll be going into our regular season schedule next week with college football Wednesday, NFL on Friday. Make sure you subscribe to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. You can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Google Play Store. We are now on Stitcher and iHeartRadio as well. You can find it all those places. So make sure you find Covering the Spread. And while you're there, leave a rating and a review. Those help us out a ton. So thank you to those of you who have left one already, and a future thank you to those of you who decide to leave one going forward. Today, we're talking a little NFL, Ed. We got Teddy Covers on, and Teddy is someone you recommended as a guest here, and Teddy has a very interesting process. I think it's going to be a good discussion because Teddy thinks about things, going against analytics and trying to counter analytics because analytics are such a huge influencer on the market. And as someone who always wants to try to find those edges, even though I am an analytics guy, I appreciate that thought process. And I think that it's a pretty fun way to think about things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is about markets, right? And in some sense, like you're trying to find edges in the markets. It doesn't matter if you find it through analytics. It doesn't matter if you find it through fading analytics. And you go all the way back to Moneyball, which started the sports analytics revolution. It was all about markets for players, right? And Billy Beane and analytics in some cases, and the fact that he was just a con man in dealing with other GMs in other places. So however you want to get it done, I'm all for it.
Markets are always changing. We have to be reactive. And I think that's a good thing that Teddy talks about. So let's bring Teddy on in just 1 second. You can find him on Twitter at Teddy_covers. You can find his work over at sportsmemo.com and a brand new show. You probably heard about the 24-hour sports betting and gaming show, channel. That's the Sports Grid Network. And Teddy does have a show on there. It's called Wager Talk. It's from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern every day. Wager Talk, the Sports Grid Network. Pretty fun concept that they've got going over there. So check out Teddy on Wager Talk and on Twitter at Teddy_covers. He is coming up in just 1 second. But first, if you want to get in on the action, check out the FanDuel Sportsbook and place your first bet today. If you lose, FanDuel will give you a refund of up to $500 in site credit. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com for more details. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus and physically present in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or at a FanDuel Sportsbook retail outlet. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's bring on Teddy Sevransky to talk NFL for Week 1 and the 2019 season.
covering the present.
Let's welcome Teddy Sevransky, or Teddy Covers, into the show. Teddy, we are getting into week 1 here, just around the corner for NFL season, so I'm sure a busy time of year for you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, although I got to say it's like 110 in Vegas, and it's humid today. It's monsoon season, so it's really uncomfortable outside, which gives me all the more reason to lock down in my office, where I've been for a good portion of the summer.
I would never leave the house.
Climate change.
I would request like drones to deliver my groceries. Like there would be so few activities that would actually inspire me to leave the house if it were 110 degrees. Like, I cannot stress how much I would dread going outside in that scenario.
Well, they say it's a dry heat. You're supposed to get used to it. And again, I've been out in Vegas. I moved out here in '98, so this isn't my first rodeo with the summertime. And right. What do you do out here? You hang out in the air conditioning.
Absolutely. I think you've got that one made. And Teddy, I think I want to talk to you about your betting philosophy too, because it seems like you've got an interesting process here. And reading into it, I think that it's going to be very different than a lot of the people we've talked to, and that's a good thing. That's what we've talked about here on Covering the Spread. We want to get a lot of different philosophies. So, Teddy, I want to start here broadly and talk about, season-long bets. What's your process when you are deciding whether to bet a win total, if you want to dive in there, if you want to bet the over or the under? What's kind of the process you go through in the offseason in determining where you stand on a team?
Well, I do a ton of work with win totals. In my mind, that is the single most positive expectation wager you can make in the NFL are the win totals. That or the yes, no, will to make the playoffs are right there in the same group. Because again, it's not like your standard futures where you're trying to bet someone to win the Super Bowl, where all one team's going to win and 31 teams are going to lose. Every team's either going to go over or under or push on their win total. So I'm not trying to pick the one black marble out of a bag of with 31 whites and one black like you are when you're trying to pick the Super Bowl winner. So I find season wins in general have been profitable for me and the best type of bet you can make when it comes to futures for the NFL. My process starts as last season goes, because what I do a lot of work with strength of schedule, and it starts with what the team's record was last year. I'm going to adjust that to shade that based on my power rating number for their opponent on the game the week was played, on the week the game was played. You're going to see all this stuff at the end of the season. Oh, this is how tough their schedule was. This is the final record of all their opponents. And so-and-so played the toughest schedule. That's not how it plays out. Did you play the 49ers in week 1 with Garoppolo, or did you play them in week 16 when they had nobody? Big difference. And you can go team by team. You'll find 20 teams that have a power rating at one point in the season 5 points higher than it was at another point during the season. At least I do, because I'm going to adjust based on the injuries. So what I'm going to first do, the very first step of the process, is give yourself an accurate assessment of the team's record from last year. Was it legitimate or was it fraudulent? And of course, then you want to factor in the turnover margin, the yards per play margin. You want to look at the stats afterwards. But initially, the very first part of the process is my powering numbers for each opponent that they played. Once you finish off at the end of last season, and I'm going to make my powering numbers, my closing powering numbers based on what happened the year before, et cetera, and now I've got some numbers to work with for 2019. Then I'm going to look at the season win numbers for this year, and again, you're going to see the mainstream numbers are atrocious when it comes to straight to schedule, because they're going to look at last year's records. Most of the analytics guys who look at this year's schedule, they don't factor in the juice properly. They're like, okay, the line's 8.5. And they factor in 8.5 wins. No, 8.5 minus 150 is a 9. 8.5 plus 150 is an 8. So you don't, 50 cents correlates very clearly to a half win in the NFL marketplace, approximately, certainly in the middle stages. When you start getting down to the margins, when you get to the 10.5s, it's probably worth a little bit more than 50 cents to get to 11, or the 5.5s down to 5 is worth a little bit more than 50 cents. But for the majority of teams, it's about 50 cents equals a half win. And so I'm going to adjust this year's strength of schedule based on the markets and the juice in those markets. And then you start to work. This is all the pre-process. Then you're like, okay, this is what happened between last year and this year for this team. You look at all, the offseason goals. I always look at all the offseason columns at the beginning. This is their goals. This is what they want to accomplish. This is what the team needs. This da. And then you go through at the end of free agency and at the end of the draft, did they actually accomplish those goals? Is the offensive line an area of strength? Did they build depth on the defensive line? And I put a lot of effort and a lot of time into the lines, the trenches, the offensive line, the defensive line, because we know where the media attention goes. It's going to go to the fantasy players. It's going to go to the skill position talent. And the reality is that games are won and lost in the trenches every week. And if you find a good offensive line, you're going to make money with that team. If you find a good defensive line, you're going to make money with that team. You find a bad offensive line, you can make money betting against them, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that's the process, or at least a good portion. But I could probably go on a lot longer.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, Teddy. And you and Jim could probably talk for hours about the offensive line, definitely. And I would love to listen in on that. Just want to say, Teddy, I do factor in the prices when I look at market totals. So as a numbers guy, but I wanted to get back into what you said about last season and in terms of how you adjust your power rankings for the situation of that team. Obviously quarterback is a huge thing. So if Jimmy Garoppolo is playing versus not, like that's a huge thing. But how deep do you go? Like, are you saying, oh, their top corner was out, so I'm going to make that a new team? Because at some point you reach a complexity issue in terms of, how many different versions of a team that you want to account for, right?
Well, I don't want to overthink it. What I want to look at is my powering number for that team that week. I'm not, I'm sure you guys do the same thing. You make lines for every game. I make lines for every, NFL game. Making lines are easy. Power rating A, power rating team, home field, blah, blah, blah. There's your line. Sure. And generally my lines tend to be, fairly close to the market. Not always, but fairly close. Well, obviously when there's differences, that's when you're going to get, you're going to get wagers down. But in terms of so if I adjusted a team's power rating because their top cornerback is out, maybe a half point, then I'm going to use that power rating. If I didn't adjust a team's power rating because the cornerback with the top cornerback was out because the backup's just as good, or there's no discernible difference between that team with one guy missing, then I don't adjust it. It's just whatever my number was, that's what I use.
And Teddy, is that a manual adjustment? Are you saying Jimmy Garoppolo is worth X points and stuff like that? Are you doing that manually by hand?
I do everything manually. I am not a formula guy. You guys are the formula guys. And I find that the markets, the betting markets in 2019 are so tilted towards the math models that I find my edge going against the math models, finding places where my whole goal, when I'm looking at the numbers for week one, where are the stats lying? Where are the points? Where are the numbers giving an incorrect assumption about these teams? And that's my entire focus: is what numbers are lying and what numbers affecting the betting marketplace in particular are lying. Because as you know, in 2019, it's all about the advanced analytics in the markets, and the public has no impact whatsoever on any of these point spreads, and the mainstream media has no impact on these point spreads, and it's all the analytics guys who are pounding and who have done well enough to be pounding limit bets all over the world, but they're also very comfortable winning 54% of their wagers and losing 46%, which anyone would be. But when you're making 300 bets a week, it's very different from a guy who's trying to pick and choose and, let's find a couple of different spots.
Right.
So Teddy, I know you're a quantitative guy too. Like, 10, 15 years ago, that was completely different, right? In the sense that
the markets, I can tell you when the markets changed. The markets changed. It was 2010 to 2012 was when during that era, the stuff that I had been using, which was ahead of the markets in 2009 and that was really 2011, 2012 were the big years where all of a sudden all the analytics are taking over the betting market, because a lot of stuff that I was using in 2009, 2010 that worked really well, by 2012 that was all baked into the number, right. And I didn't realize it at the time. I had a miserable season. And I'm like, okay, you better figure out what the F just happened, because, this can't, you can't do that again next year. And I didn't, I readjusted the philosophy. But what I saw in that analysis in 2012, 2013 was that what the markets were is not what they are. It's always evolving. And the analytics that had been a piece of the equation prior to that then became the primary piece of the equation around that stage. And it's been that way ever since.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And I think that the thing that I like about this, Teddy, is that you are considering the context. And that's something that I try to do a lot with baseball DFS, consider the context in which it's happening. Zach Greinke at the beginning of 2019 is not the same Zach Greinke that we're seeing right now. And so I like to look for most relevant samples. And I think that it sounds like you're kind of in a similar realm here. Are there specific places you look for to try to identify places that the analytics community and thus the betting markets may be overvaluing? You mentioned offensive line. Is that kind of the first place you go to?
That's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Because it's a very nuanced question. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not this. When someone says, what's your process? My process is everything. Okay.
Right.
The process is everything I can think about this game. That's what we do. You wake up thinking about it. You go through the day thinking about it. You're looking for any additional information on the game. You're looking at all the stats and the hard numbers on the game. You're looking for any nuance. Hey, wow. This offensive line coach, guess what? He worked for them last year, and he's going to know the blocking schemes better. And any little nuance you can find. Anything you can find to give you an edge that's not baked into the point spread is worth searching for. It really is. So when you say, give me the process, it's not an easy question to answer. It's, the process is always ongoing. But I'm not someone that's going to run a program and say, all right, well, I like the Chiefs and the Colts and the Cowboys this week, and I'm done.
Yeah.
That's my powering differentials is the first piece of the equation, but it's certainly not the only piece of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes a lot of sense.
So after you account for all these things, when you're telling us about how you look at NFL win totals, are there any teams that you'd like to tell us about that stand out in the win totals market?
Yeah, there's a bunch of teams that stand out in the win totals market. Look,
just something that maybe illustrates
let
the point.
Let me just think here for 1 second. I'll give you one. Because there's so many that are I found this year to be fairly attractive in the NFL betting markets, and I'm just trying to think of one that maybe that I'm still interested in, where the line hasn't gone nuts yet, because I haven't made every bet that I'm gonna make as of this moment. Let's talk about the Cleveland Browns for a minute.
Okay.
All right, which is the ultimate public team this year, right?
Sure.
I'm very bullish on the Cleveland Browns. Okay. Call me a Cleveland Browns believer. And when you start, all the people who are telling me, well, Cleveland, and they haven't. When you look at this roster, okay, top to bottom, find me another roster in the NFL that's more talented than Cleveland. Name me one. Go. Yeah.
I can't even say Chiefs, because that defensive line for Cleveland is going to blow the Chiefs defense out of the water. They were the first thing that came to mind, but I can easily counteract that argument. So I can't think of one necessarily.
The Browns are lined at 9 wins, and everyone's like, that's crazy. Cleveland can't be lined at 9. You grade out their 53-man roster, they're going to be as good as anyone in the NFL. And there is a clear there appears to be a clear, sharp market hatred for the Browns. And the reason is, it seems to me, because the public likes the Browns. That's not a legitimate reason. Okay. And for a sharp betting marketplace that was in love with the Browns analytics 3 years ago when they didn't win a game, and bet them every week the year after when they win a one game. Every week, the wise guy Browns money's coming in. Look at the Browns stats. The turnover margin, it's all turnovers. I like Cleveland. Chicago's another team. Okay, at the beginning of the process, my first process, man, this Bears team, my absolute first gut reaction, we got to look at the Bears under. Look at the turnover margin. Look at the turnover margin. We don't believe in Trubisky. Look at the turnover margin.
Right.
And then, they lost Fangio. He's the guy. They lost Fangio. The Bears have to stink this year. No one believes in Trubisky, blah, 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 blah. Then you read the reports out of camp. You're like, the defense is dominating every single practice. And then you watch the defense on the field in the preseason, and the third stringers are getting 93-yard pick sixes. Okay? Teams don't have third stringers that can do that. The Bears do. It's the best defense in the NFL. I'm not betting the Bears under. And the analytics guys, all about betting against Chicago this year. Look at the turnover margin. I'm not betting the Bears under the total. So it's just some concepts, I guess, that I like the Bears and I like the Browns, I think, a little bit more than many of my sharp colleagues.
Interesting. And the Browns one, very interesting too, because it fits well with what you said was your process. You want to account for situation, and the Browns and the situation changed, thrived last year, and the situation is the same going into this year. They add Odell Beckham, so I understand that for sure. Let's talk about a team whose situation very recently changed, and that's the Colts. Their win total initially shot down to 6.5 wins with the Andrew Luck news of his retirement. That's a FanDuel Sportsbook. It's now 7 with -110 on the over and the under. So, Teddy, I want to hear your process here with the Colts, where we have some late-breaking information. You see that number at 7. What's your thought process on the Colts heading into 2019?
It's a very difficult question for me to answer. The answer for me for the Colts is we'll see. I thought I was all bright. I got a nice ticket. I bet it right when the Lions opened, +3.5 against the Chargers in week 1. And the line was, 2 days later it was +3. I'm like, yeah, I got a good number. That was a good bet. Oops. +3.5, not so good. And it's not like Boise, Florida State, where they give the money back because it's at a different venue. Your quarterback gets hurt, so be it. I'm stuck with that wager now. There's nothing I'm going to do about it. There were a lot of things I really liked about Indy coming into the season. I mean, again, from a depth perspective, the Colts are deep. They really are strong in the trenches, both sides of the football. Loved their offseason. Loved what they did in the offseason. They made a bunch of win-now moves in the offseason. And now they're not in win-now. I mean, Jacoby Brissett is a touchdown weaker than Andrew Luck. Minimum. Literally a minimum. I mean, so whatever thoughts I had about value with and one thing that we've learned in the NFL, back in Brett Hundley, I'm like, oh, the Packers are just fine. The Packers will be fine with Brett Hundley. But the coaching staff didn't trust him. So Brett Hundley, they didn't open it up. And then lo and behold, there's Green Bay losing at home to Detroit. I'm like, Jesus, how did that? And of course, that coaching staff's gone. Thank you. But you find situations where, it's not just about how you see that quarterback, it's how the coaching staff sees that quarterback. I'll never forget that Hundley game. It really made me. I'm like, Hundley can play. He's okay. He makes the plays with his feet. And the coaching staff is like, you better dink and dunk everything. Don't take any shots. And make sure that all 11 guys are right in the box. Jacoby Brissett has shown me very little as an NFL potential starting quarterback. And Luck was as good as a quarterback there is in the league. Maybe the best. And that includes Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady and anybody else you want to include. That's who Andrew Luck was when it comes to fourth quarter comebacks, when it comes to, winning percentage against opponents with a winning record, when it comes to record as a dog. Luck stats were there the whole time. So I think you have to make a significant adjustment for Indy, and not just Indy. Here's the other factor. You have to adjust every team in their division. You also have to adjust every team on their schedule, because guess what? A probable loss is now a 50-50 game. A 50-50 game is now maybe they're favored. So the win total ramifications of the injury are significant around the league, even though the only win total that got adjusted was the Indianapolis Colts win total.
Yeah. And I got so much respect for the FanDuel Sportsbook and what they do. But when Colts went from 6 to 7, nothing else moved. And, my numbers some of my algorithms kind of balked at that because they're like, if Colts are going up to 7, then something should change in that division as well. So we'll see how that all shakes out. Teddy, I did want to ask you, you said you liked their addition. I presume you're talking about Justin Houston, bringing him in on the defensive line. Tell me about that defensive line, because I'm not enthused about how they've performed over the last couple of years.
Indy,
yeah.
The depth is there for the Colts, and that to me is the number one factor. The second factor, it's for the Colts. And again, I can run through a bunch of personnel. I don't want to run through the personnel. I think that a lot of times you spend too much time doing, oh, this guy's good and that guy's okay. And this, But when I went through the Colts roster and graded out your players, graded out your free agents, graded out your draft choices, watching them in the preseason, and again, you want to take a lot of preseason stuff with a grain of salt, especially after the first quarter. But you do want to pay attention in the first quarter. Those guys are on the field. Indy's defensive line has been fine, and their defensive numbers were fine last year. I look at the defensive line as a unit of strength. Maybe not a star-studded unit for the Colts, but certainly not a unit that teams are going to. I don't think teams are going to run all over Indy. The pass rush may be dicey, but in terms of stopping the run, I think Indy's going to be pretty darn good at that. At least on paper, they look good at that, and in the preseason, they've been solid.
All right, Teddy. You asked me for a team more talented than the Browns. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What about the Eagles? Because when I think about offensive line depth and I think about defensive line depth, the Eagles are a team that stand out. They have some issues at cornerback, to be sure, but they've got the pass catchers. They've got the quarterback in Carson Wentz. What are your thoughts about them heading into 2019 as someone who does value what a team can do up front on an offensive and defensive line?
I'll keep this very simple. I don't bet a lot of over 10s for win totals. You tend to. I don't like to expect teams to win 11 games. I did bet the Eagles over 10 wins this year. I'm a firm believer in Philadelphia, and that's with the backup quarterback situation, it's a concern. I mean, if Wentz goes down, they were in trouble anyway. If Wentz goes down, that bet is dead. But when you talk about an offensive line that's supposed to be able to protect the quarterback and a big quarterback who's gone through a lot of conditioning stuff in the offseason, Carson Wentz is that guy. You want a long shot future. Wentz to win MVP might be something you would look at.
All right, I dig it. So we're on the same page there. Eagles are a team that I've been very interested in for this year as well. So let's talk about Week 1 a little bit, because I think that there could be some interesting value you may see up there when you look at the Week 1 lines. And this could be something that you grabbed when it opened. It may not be available anymore. What were some things that stood out to you based on the offseason research you put into each team?
Well, I mean, the first again, I made one bet right when I saw the numbers. I'm like, Colts plus 3.5. Great number, great bet. Right. That was the one. And literally, it stood out to me like a sore thumb. I'm like, I'm like that line, because anytime you're talking about making a bet in April or May or June for a game that isn't going to be played in September, the only reason to make that bet is if the number's not going to be there. Mm-hmm. That was the number that wasn't going to be there. I bet the Ravens at 4.5 against the Dolphins. What's that now?
It is 5.
Yeah, so I got a little bit to bet, but I thought that line has a decent chance to go to 6 or 7, and I'm like, let's lock in at 4.5. I'm like, it's not going to go down,
right?
Based on I was fairly confident of that. So that's two bets that I made pretty early for Week 1, and I grabbed a 7 with the Texans against the Saints. That's one that stood out to me. Of course, you guys know Peyton's track record Week 1 and 2, right?
Last year you got torched.
Not last year. Go back 5 years. Find me a point spread covered Week 1 or 2. 0.
Probably none.
Peyton never has them ready coming out of camp. So I took the 7 with Texas. 0-10 ATS the first 2 weeks of the season, the last 5 years for New Orleans.
Interesting. Now, what about when a team in their early season performance deviates a lot from what you expected in the season? Because we do want to take advantage of relevant data and stuff like that. How reactive are you in Week 1, or do you think that markets tend to overreact to what they see on the field in Week 1?
If there's a team, let's say we talk about the Eagles, we're like, I like the Eagles, or the Browns, I'm like, I like the Browns, or if the Bears get beat by the Packers, the Bears I might adjust a little bit more. But if I see a team that I like and they lay an egg Week 1, I will adjust very little, if at all. Mm-hmm. If they lay an egg Week 1 and then lay another egg in Week 2, we have to adjust and significantly adjust. A single bad game, no. 2 bad games, 3 bad games. But you also want to know, why did they have a bad game? Was it a game? Oh, it's just one of those games. They kept on getting in their own way, and the penalties, and every time they would have 1st and 10, and and then it's 1st and 20. There are games that are like, that just happens that way, and it's just an off game, and you don't over adjust. And then you say, all right, well, let's see. They lost this week because the offensive line couldn't block anyone, and they got crushed, and the pressure had quarterback in his face the whole game. Well, now you got to think about, hey, were there offensive line injuries? Is the offensive line not as good as we thought it was? You better adjust fast, but you cannot over-adjust or overreact to a single Week 1 performance, good or bad.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like we see that a lot in college football. There's such a short season, and then you get one bad game, and things tend to overreact, which is why I like Week 2 in college football.
Let me jump in real quick, Ed, because I actually went back and did a study. You'll like this. I did some analytics.
Awesome.
I went back and did a study about the best point spread teams in college football over a 5-year span.
Okay.
There was one commonality. The commonality was they all suffered. The most common theme was the very best point spread teams in college football on a year in year out basis all suffer an ugly performance the first 3 one of the first 2 weeks of the season. So somebody gets wiped off the field in a game they were supposed to win, or, they have a step-up game and they lose by 8 touchdowns or whatever it is. Those tend to be and they're actually a decent team. Those are the teams that ended the season 9-3, 10-2 ATS. The team even 8-4. Those are, and then they've already lost an ugly one. Those are the teams you can make the most money with. They're teams that had a single bad showing in one of the first few weeks.
Interesting. Of course, that doesn't work for a team like Louisville last year, but I completely get that, right? Because the market kind of looks at that in the first 2 weeks and says, and just kind of overestimates the shift, right?
Well, where did the market struggle early? The market struggled with teams like Louisville last year. The market struggled at the top and at the bottom. The bottom feeders are always overvalued early in the season, often overvalued early I shouldn't say always, but, the really bad teams, the teams where the bottom has fallen out, they're not bad. They're not bet-ons in week one. And they're not bet-ons moving forward. I mean, Louisville last year, they quit on Petrino pretty early, and Petrino was cashing his check, and that was that. It was ugly. But, you'll see that in the NFL as well, where, the very early in the season, the number one thing I want to do is bet on the best teams and bet against the worst teams. That's another reason why I laid with Baltimore week one. Miami's garbage, okay? I cashed an over win bet on the Dolphins last year, and I've never been luckier in my life to cash that bet. I mean, they were literally every game they won, they deserved to lose, including the Gronk game, which was the one that cashed my season win bet on Miami. But Miami there's nothing to like about the Dolphins on any position on the field, and this is when you see teams at the very bottom, they're not necessarily power to right for week one. So I'm always looking to back the very best teams and bet against the very worst. That's my September strategy.
Interesting. Taylor, let me ask you just one last question. I mean, you definitely mentioned about how you're very reluctant to bet over 10 wins. Is it symmetrical on the bottom side of the NFL? So, for example, are you more likely to bet under 5 wins for a team that you think is very bad, maybe say like a Miami?
No, I don't rarely bet the under 5s and the over 10s. The sweet spot for me always, it used to be, you find the 9.5 win team that's down and you bet them under, and you find the 6.5 win team that's on the way up and you bet them over. The markets are a little bit more mature with that stuff now, so you don't find it quite as easily. So you have to sometimes get out of your little comfort zone. And I will play more. Honest, I mean, I wouldn't talk anyone out of betting the Dolphins under. Would not talk you out of it. But now we're seeing 4.5s out there even on Miami. It's not a bet that I've gotten to the window with.
But you do feel like it's symmetric, right? I mean, bet towards the mean, whether it's high or low.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
All right, that is Teddy Sevransky, or Teddy Covers. You can find him on Twitter at Teddy_covers. Teddy, that was a fun conversation. I enjoyed hearing about the way you think about the NFL. I think it's a really fun process and one that can be profitable, especially early in the season. So, Teddy, appreciate it, and hopefully we can get you on again sometime soon.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL's been good to me. I cannot complain about the NFL. I think at 62% start to finish last year, 58% over the last 4 years, and the win totals are over 70% lifetime. So that dates back, close to 2 decades. So, I mean, I got no problems. I'll talk NFL anytime you guys want. Thanks for having me on the show, and good luck with the new podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Cheers.
Covering the future.
One final big thank you to Teddy Sevransky for swinging by for today and talking NFL. Again, he's at Teddy_covers on Twitter. You can find his show, Wager Talk, on the Sports Grid Network from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern every day, and also find his writing work over at sportsmemo.com. And Ed, I was pretty excited about that conversation going in, and it lived up to it, because I think that Teddy, it's always good to have those perspectives and kind of get regrounded in, what betting actually is, and that's trying to exploit markets and where they go.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about finding an edge, and I was really interested about just how that process has changed, and then, to the exact year in which kind of analytics took over. And, I kind of felt like I saw that in some ways as well. Like, there was a lot more value when I first started doing kind of my team rankings in 2008. And now there's just no way that you could find value with only my team rankings.
Right.
You need a lot. You need a lot of other tricks these days. I always really enjoy the historical perspective, and Teddy really gave it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a really fun conversation. So thanks, Teddy, for coming on. And be sure to check out his work again at sportsmemo.com for that and Wager Talk. Let's move now to covering the future. Ed, this is our final, I guess, kind of show before we get to week 1. So what do you have on tap for covering the future for this week?
So I was digging in. I wanted to add another college football win total for members of my site at the Power Rank. I was like, Army, 10 wins, man. I mean, this is like an easy under, right? They got Michigan. That's 1 loss already. So I just got to find another loss, another 2 losses. So I'm going through the schedule and take a break to walk around. I was like, crap, they played 13 games. So we scrapped Army. So instead, I want to talk about Seattle, since this is the NFL part of the show. And, they were good last year. They were 10-6, and they made the playoffs. And let's talk about the good things about that team. Russell Wilson, the quarterback. He's done it at an elite level over the last 7 years of his career. Now let's talk about the bad. The underlying statistics for that Seattle team were not good. I'm going to tell you about success rate, and I define that as 50% of the necessary yards on first down would be a success, 70% of yards on second down, and all the necessary yards on third and fourth down. And when I look at success rate and I adjust for strength of schedule, the offense was 25th. And part of the reason is Seattle insists on running the ball. They do it more than any other team in the NFL, 52% of plays last week. And I talked about that a little bit on one of my preview episodes on the Football Analytics Show about just how silly that is and the equivalent of running the ball. When you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson, it's just not the right thing to do. But Seattle was effective at scoring points last year. They were actually 8th in the NFL in terms of points per game. So how does that jive, right? Well, one of the reasons was turnovers. Seattle was really good at preventing turnovers. Part of that was Russell Wilson, because he tends to turn over the ball less than less accurate quarterbacks. But a big part of it was fumbles. They only lost 4 fumbles last year, even though the offense put it on the ground 18 times. And anytime that you're recovering 14 out of 18 turnovers, that tends to be very random and not something that's repeatable coming into the next season. On defense, I also don't really like this team as well. They were 25th in adjusted success rate on defense. They also no longer have Frank Clark. They also no longer have Earl Thomas, although he didn't really play a lot of games last year. And then their best defensive lineman, Jaron Reed, is suspended for 6 games as well. So Seattle's at 8.5 wins, and I think this all comes down to how many wins do you think Russell Wilson is worth? That could be 8.5 wins. I personally don't think he's quite worth that much. I think he's worth about 7.5 wins. I like under Seattle the win total.
And I think that the interesting thing about this team that makes them very difficult for me to diagnose is that going into last year, I thought the defensive personnel was bad. And I made a lot of decisions around that.
Okay.
And even with that personnel being bad, they still outperformed expectations.
Right.
That's a concern for me because it could be an acknowledgement of the system on defense. Maybe the coaching is just really good there. But it's so hard, I feel like, to repeat that, especially given the guys that they lost.
Right.
Like, Frank Clark, like, the system can make him better, but can it turn him into, this guy who's worth a first-round pick and a meaty contract? I don't know. It's very hard for me to see that being a thing. So I think I am in agreement with you on Seattle, where I'm skeptical of a lot of things that they have going, and I'm skeptical of the talent. And now they have a bunch of injuries at wide receiver to DK Metcalf and David Moore. They're both banged up, so it's kind of just Tyler Lockett and a bunch of dudes.
Yeah, well,
that's concerning.
And I should have mentioned Doug Baldwin retired. So
right.
Top target last year, and so
he was like a shell of himself. But a shell of himself, Doug Baldwin, is probably still better than Jerron Brown.
Yeah, probably. I mean, Lockett's very good, and I think he's going to be fine as the top option there. And they were particularly good connecting on the deep ball last year.
Russell Wilson was the most efficient deep ball passer in the NFL last year, based on expected points.
Yeah,
but they just don't do it enough. Like, they do it on a per throw basis.
Right.
But like, if you have a dude who can like chuck it and succeed? Why not let him chuck it and succeed?
So when I was looking into the analysis, Seattle ran 52% of the time, right? Mm-hmm. If they ran 41% of the time, which was the NFL average, that would have been 119 more plays. So essentially running the ball those 119 plays was like taking Russell Wilson out of the game and putting in Josh Rosen, and from a pure efficiency standpoint. Now,
I love that way of looking at it.
What?
I love that way of looking at it.
Appreciate that. And it's like the analogy isn't perfect. We're just talking about yards per play. They got 4.7 yards per play on the ground, which is pretty good. It's above the NFL average. Josh Rosen threw for about 4.5 yards per attempt last year, which was dead last in the NFL. Obviously, if you throw it more, you're more likely to throw a pick, especially if it's Josh Rosen. But yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing above and beyond just the kind of talent deficiencies that I think this team has. Like if they're going to continue to pound the ball, it's not going to work out well. And inevitably, like if this season goes like I think it's going to go, I think they're going to lose some games, and they're going to be down late in games, and they're going to be throwing the ball because even they know that you have to throw the ball late in the game when you're down. So we could see more of Russell Wilson. They might not lead the NFL in rushing quite as much as they did last year. They probably still will, but we'll see how it shakes out.
I think that they are a team that I want to wait and see what they do in week 1, because the rumblings out of camp are encouraging because they're talking about throwing to their backs more on first and second down, which is, Warren Sharp talks about how that's like a cheat code. Like that's a very efficient play to throw to your running backs on first and second down. And the fact that they're valuing that, it makes me think maybe that they're listening to the numbers, but I want to see it in action.
But that means they have to throw the ball.
Right, exactly. Like that, yeah, exactly. But I think it means that they may have consulted numbers at some point, and that makes me curious, because if they decided to run an optimal offense, they could be really good. I just don't know if they're going to do that. So I am watching them closely the first couple of weeks, more so than like any other team pretty much. I'll be watching Seattle very closely. I want to talk here about the Ravens, and it's still kind of, going back to what Teddy said, where we have the Colts change from Andrew Luck retiring, but we haven't seen a lot of movement in the other markets. And I think that the Ravens are one of the benefactors of the Andrew Luck retirement, because we talked about Kansas City winning the Super Bowl earlier in the week, but I think that this injury to Andrew Luck also impacts potential wildcard teams too, because going into the year, you look at Indy, you look at Houston, maybe Jacksonville as teams that could be in contention for a wildcard spot. That AFC South had more than one team that was a playoff level team, which impacts teams that want to win the wild card, because the Chargers and the Chiefs, one of those teams is probably going to take up one of the other ones because they're both very good teams. Derwin James maybe impacts that, but either way, seeing the Colts take a dive definitely impacts the availability of wild cards elsewhere. And I think that what that does is it opens up the possibility for us to get a wild card team from the AFC North. And I didn't really see that as being a huge likelihood prior to this. And the Ravens right now are plus 184 to make the playoffs at FanDuel Sportsbook. That's implied odds of 35.2%. And I like that number quite a bit because that AFC North is pretty wide open. Nobody has odds better than 35% right now, according to NumberFire's power rankings. And the Ravens are actually at 30.4% to win the division. And to get it at plus 184, their implied odds making the playoffs are 35.2%. Their overall playoff odds at NumberFire are 47.2%. So that's a really good number there. And I think that you could look to this Ravens team and, the what-ifs on the downside are that Lamar Jackson could be a bad passer. He did struggle at times last year, but he wasn't abysmal as a passer. His rushing abilities can open up lanes for him as a passer, and that has value. They added playmakers. Hollywood Brown is there. Looks like he's getting healthier now. Miles Boykin is there. Extreme athletic freak. Justice Hill, same thing. And they also added Earl Thomas to the back end of that secondary, and they did lose big players. Like C.J. Moses is a good player. Terrell Suggs is gone. But I think that adding in Earl Thomas at least helps mitigate some of the guys they lost defensively. And I think that the overall thought process for me is that I don't think betting markets are accounting enough yet for the ripple effects of the Andrew Luck retirement. And that's exactly what Teddy was talking about, where people aren't adjusting anyone outside of the Colts, and they should be. And to me, it just opened up another wild card spot, and the Ravens are one of those teams that could exploit it. They could win the AFC North outright, or they could wind up doing it this way. So you look at the Ravens' schedule, they open at Miami, as Teddy mentioned, and then they are at home against Arizona. They're probably going to start 2-0. And if that does happen, this line will move in a hurry. So I would snatch this one now before week 1, betting the Ravens plus 184 to make the playoffs. And I don't think I've heard your thoughts on the Ravens yet. We talked about them a bit with Evan Silva as a team that he liked, but what are your personal thoughts on this team heading into year 2 with Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether Lamar Jackson can throw the ball at an NFL level.
Which matters.
Kind of. Yeah, no, it definitely matters. And the quarterback's kind of an important position. Kind of need to throw the ball. I definitely believe Lamar Jackson is a talented guy. Actually kind of got a little bit of an inside scoop from a student here that was in their camp. And, kind of confirmed what we all think about Lamar Jackson. I think the kid can improve, but I think what you see with any quarterback coming from the college level going into the NFL, there becomes a ceiling with their accuracy and their ability to deliver the ball. And yeah, I just have my doubts. I need to see it from Lamar Jackson to be higher on this team. And again, I think the division is really interesting because we should actually do some talking about Pittsburgh, who I think is also going to be a pretty good team. And then you obviously have Cleveland that we already talked about in this show. So could be a very fascinating division. And with Baltimore, yeah, I mean, the defense was great too. I mean, they were by far the best defense by a lot of my numbers last year. And adding a healthy, if Earl Thomas is healthy, that's
right. That's a big if.
What?
Sure. That's a big if.
Okay.
For sure.
So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the Ravens.
Yeah, I think they'll be interesting to watch, and I think that they have a wide range of outcomes. But I think that number at plus 184 accounts for that. Interested to see what they can do in week 1. I mean, it's the Dolphins. We probably can't learn a lot there, but we might learn a lot against the Chiefs in week 3. So that'll be interesting team to track for sure. But overall, the thought process is take advantage of the Luck retirement before all the markets do. Ed, that's all we got for today. Again, next week we go into our regular season schedule with college football Wednesday, NFL on Friday. What's happening over at the Power Rank before then?
Yeah, the 2019 preview series on my podcast, the Football Analytics Show, is wrapping up. Episode 10 goes up tonight. It'll be 3 overrated college football teams for 2019. I kind of spilled the beans on some of the things I talked about with Seattle on Monday, but that's probably my favorite episode, and I'm glad you like my Rosen analogy because that's kind of why I like that one the most.
Yeah.
But yeah, 10 episodes, 10 minutes each. You can check them out, get a little bit of insight into the work I do and how it can help you predict what's going to happen this season.
And that's the Football Analytics Show. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find that. You can find Ed on Twitter at The Power Rank and all his work over at thepowerrank.com. I am on Twitter as well at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you goes out to Calvin Theobald, our producer, for keeping us on the air here. And a big thank you to Teddy Covers for swinging on by and talking about the NFL and his process for 2019. Do not forget to rate and review the podcast and subscribe wherever you are listening. We really do appreciate it. And make sure you can get those podcasts right as they go up next week. Everybody enjoy week 1, true week 1 of college football. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. A lot of great games in the docket. So enjoy the football, and we'll talk to you again next week. This has been Covering the Spread here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.